Either you find a job, Mom, or you're out on the street. My daughter didn't raise her voice when she said it, and somehow that made it worse. The words landed softly, like they belonged in a normal conversation, like she was reminding me to pick up groceries or take out the trash. I was still holding my fork when she said it, a small piece of overcooked chicken halfway to my mouth, and for a moment, I forgot how to move. The dining room felt too quiet without Harold. It had only been 7 days since we buried him, 7 days since I stood beside a polished oak casket and said goodbye to the man I had spent 43 years loving. His chair was still at the head of the table, slightly pulled out like he had just stepped away and might come back at any moment. I looked at it now instead of at my daughter. Linda sat across from me, her posture straight, her expression calm, almost bored. There was no anger in her face. No hesitation either. Just a kind of cold certainty, like she had already made peace with what she was doing. I don't understand, I said finally, though I understood perfectly. She set her napkin down beside her plate, carefully, like everything she did these days. You can't just sit here anymore, Mom. Things have changed. Things have changed. Such simple words to describe the complete unraveling of a life. I glanced toward the hallway where 2 suitcases stood neatly by the front door. I hadn't noticed them when I came downstairs earlier. Or maybe I had, and my mind refused to accept what they meant. They were mine. I recognized the old brown leather, the one Harold and I used on our last trip to Vermont. Linda followed my gaze and didn't even try to hide it. I packed some essentials for you, she said. Essentials. As if I were going on a short vacation. As if I had somewhere to go. I set my fork down slowly, my hand steady in a way that surprised even me. Inside, something was shifting, but it wasn't panic. Not yet. It was something quieter. Something colder. You packed my things, I repeated. She nodded. You'll figure something out. You always do. I studied her face, searching for the little girl I used to. No. The one who cried when she scraped her knee, who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who once told me I was the strongest person she knew. I couldn't find her. Not anywhere. Instead, I saw a woman who looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. A burden to be managed. I stood up from the table, pushing my chair in gently, the same way I had done every night for decades. The routine felt almost sacred now, like it belonged to a different life. Linda didn't move. She didn't offer to help. She didn't say anything else. I walked past her, past the empty chair at the head of the table, past the framed family photos lining the wall. There we were, smiling on a beach in Florida. There we were again, at Linda's college graduation, Harold's arm wrapped proudly around her shoulders. So many moments captured in perfect stillness, none of them hinting at this. When I reached the front door, I paused. The suitcases were already there, waiting. Ready. I rested my hand on the handle of one of them, feeling the worn leather under my fingers. Harold had always insisted on buying quality things. If it's going to carry your life, he used to say, it better be strong enough to hold it. I almost smiled at the memory. Almost. Behind me, Linda's voice came again, softer this time, but no warmer. There's a bus station about 10 miles from here. You can catch a ride into the city. 10 miles. She had thought this through. Planned it. I nodded once, though she couldn't see my face. All right, I said. Just one word. Calm. Measured. I opened the door, and the evening air met me, cool and unfamiliar. The house behind me felt different now. Smaller somehow. Like it had already let me go. I stepped outside, pulling the suitcase behind me, the wheels clicking softly against the concrete path Harold had poured with his own hands 30 years ago. No one followed me. No one called my name. I reached the end of the driveway and stopped, looking back one last time. The porch light flickered on, casting a warm glow over the front of the house. For a second, it looked exactly the same as it always had. Safe. Welcoming. Home. But I knew better now. I turned away and kept walking. They thought I had nowhere to go. They thought I would break quietly, disappear into whatever corner of the world people like me were supposed to fade into. And maybe, just a week ago, they would have been right. But as I walked down that darkening street, something inside me settled into place. Not grief. Not fear. Something sharper than that. Something patient. They had already decided who I was without Harold. They just hadn't realized yet that they were wrong. I did not go to the bus station. I kept walking past it, even when I saw the dim sign flickering under a tired streetlight about a mile down the road. 10 miles suddenly felt like a suggestion, not a direction. My hands tightened slightly around the handle of my suitcase as I moved past the entrance without slowing down. There was a bench outside with two people sitting on it, both staring down at their phones, waiting for something to arrive and take them somewhere else. I realized I was not waiting for anything. Not anymore. The night air carried a chill that settled into my coat, but I did not mind it. It kept me awake. It kept me clear. For the first time in days, my thoughts were not clouded by the dull weight of grief. They were sharp, focused, quiet in a different way. I walked for another 20 minutes before I stopped in front of a small brick building with a glowing sign that read First National Bank. It was closed, of course. The glass doors reflected a version of me I barely recognized. My hair looked more silver than it had a week ago. My shoulders slightly bent, not from age, but from something heavier. Still, my eyes were steady. I stood there for a moment, just looking at the building, remembering the last time Harold and I had walked through those doors together. It had been a Tuesday morning, bright and ordinary. He had insisted on stopping by after breakfast, said there were a few things he wanted to review. I remembered how he held the door open for me, how he smiled at the teller like he always did, as if every small interaction deserved kindness. Back then, I thought it was just another errand. Now I understood it had been something else entirely. I turned away from the dark glass and continued down the street until I found a small motel at the edge of town. The kind with a buzzing neon sign and a parking lot half filled with pickup trucks and older sedans. It was not the kind of place I had ever stayed before, but it would do. Inside, the front desk clerk barely looked up as I approached. He slid a registration card toward me and told me the nightly rate. $79. I nodded, reaching into my purse, feeling the familiar texture of my wallet. I handed over my card without hesitation. The transaction went through with a soft beep, and for a brief second, I felt a flicker of relief. At least that still worked. The room was small, but clean enough. A bed, a dresser, a television mounted slightly crooked on the wall. I set my suitcase down beside the bed and sat on the edge of the mattress, listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioner. It was strange how quickly a place could become silent when there was no one else in it. No footsteps upstairs. No voices in the next room. Just the low, steady sound of a machine doing its job. I leaned back slowly, staring at the ceiling. The events of the evening replayed in my mind, but they felt distant already, like something I had watched happen to someone else. Linda's voice. The suitcases. The porch light. All of it clear, but somehow detached. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to remember. Harold's voice came back to me, not as a sound, but as a feeling. Calm. Certain. He had always been that way. Even in the hospital, even in those final days when everything around us felt uncertain, he had held my hand and told me that I would be all right. Not in a vague, comforting way, but with a quiet confidence that made me believe him. At the time, I thought he was trying to ease my fear. Now I began to wonder if he had known more than he let on. I sat up again, suddenly alert. The memory of that Tuesday morning at the bank sharpened in my mind. The way he had spoken to the manager behind closed doors. The way he had asked me to sign something, then smiled. When I hesitated and said, "Trust me," I had trusted him. Without question, I stood up and walked over to my suitcase, unzipping it slowly. Inside were neatly folded clothes, just as Linda had said. Essentials. A few blouses, a sweater, a pair of shoes. And at the bottom, tucked beneath everything else, was a small envelope I did not remember packing. My fingers paused over it for a moment before I picked it up. My name was written on the front in Harold's handwriting. The sight of it made my chest tighten, but I did not let myself stop. I opened the envelope carefully and pulled out a single sheet of paper along with a small key attached to a plastic tag. The paper was short, just a few lines, but each word felt deliberate. He had written about the bank, about a safe deposit box, about things he wanted me to have, things he said I might need if things ever changed. I read it twice, then a third time, letting the meaning settle in. He had known. Maybe not exactly what would happen, but enough to prepare for it. I closed my eyes briefly, holding the paper in my hands. The grief was still there, but it had shifted. It was no longer just loss. It was something steadier now, something that felt almost like direction. I placed the paper back into the envelope and held the small key between my fingers, feeling its weight. It was not heavy, but it carried something far greater than its size suggested. I looked around the motel room, at the plain walls and the single lamp casting a soft yellow light, and I realized that this was not the end of anything. It was a beginning. A quiet one. The kind that does not announce itself. I sat back down on the bed, the key still in my hand, and for the first time since I walked out of that house, I allowed myself a small, controlled breath. They thought I had nothing left. They thought they had already taken everything that mattered. But Harold had left me more than memories. And tomorrow, I was going to find out exactly what that meant. The next morning arrived without ceremony, just a pale gray light slipping through the thin motel curtains and settling across the worn carpet. I had not slept much, but I did not feel tired. My body felt lighter than it should have after everything that had happened, as if something heavy had already been left behind. I sat up slowly, the envelope still resting on the nightstand beside me, exactly where I had placed it before closing my eyes. For a moment, I simply looked at it, at the familiar curve of Harold's handwriting, steady and deliberate even in what must have been one of his final weeks. I reached for it again, unfolding the paper with the same care as before, rereading every word. He had not written much, but he had written enough. A safe deposit box. First National Bank. My name was listed beside his. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the meaning settle deeper this time. He had made sure I would not be unprepared. He had made sure I would not be alone in ways that mattered. I stood up and moved with quiet purpose, washing my face in the small sink, smoothing my hair back into place, choosing one of the blouses Linda had packed for me. It felt strange wearing something she had selected, but I did not let that thought linger. Today was not about her. When I stepped outside, the morning air was crisp and carried the faint scent of coffee from somewhere nearby. The town looked the same as it always had, ordinary and unremarkable, but I felt different walking through it now. Each step felt intentional, directed. I did not rush. I did not hesitate. The bank came into view just as it had the night before, but in daylight it looked more solid, more certain. The glass doors reflected the street behind me instead of my own face this time, and I preferred it that way. I walked inside and was greeted by the soft hum of conversation and the faint tapping of keyboards. A young teller smiled politely as I approached, her expression professional and neutral. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you today?" I returned the smile, steady and composed. "I need to access a safe deposit box," I said, placing the small key gently on the counter. Her eyes flickered briefly to the key, then back to me. "Of course. I will just need to verify your identification." I handed over my driver's license without a word. She typed something into her computer, her fingers moving quickly, and after a moment, her expression shifted slightly. Not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. She glanced up again, this time with a touch more attention. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her tone a bit more formal now. "If you could follow me, I will take you to the vault." I nodded and followed her down a quiet hallway, the sounds of the main lobby fading behind us. The air felt cooler here, more controlled. She opened a secure door with a keycard and led me into a room lined with rows of metal boxes, each one identical, each one holding something someone believed was important enough to protect. She stopped in front of a smaller box and gestured toward it. "This is yours," she said, handing me a second key. "I will give you some privacy." She stepped back and left the room, the door closing softly behind her. For a moment, I just stood there, the two keys in my hands, the weight of the moment settling around me. Then I stepped forward and inserted both keys into the lock, turning them carefully. The box slid open with a quiet, almost understated motion. Inside, there were only a few items. A stack of documents, neatly organized, a small velvet pouch, and another envelope with my name on it. I reached for the documents first, lifting them out and placing them on the small table beside me. My eyes moved across the pages slowly, deliberately, taking in each line, each signature, each date. Property records, account statements, legal papers I recognized only in fragments at first, then more clearly as I continued. My name appeared again and again, not as an afterthought, not as a beneficiary to be considered later, but as the primary holder. The house, the accounts, assets I had assumed were shared, or perhaps even controlled elsewhere, were clearly, unmistakably mine. I felt a steady breath move through me, not sharp, not surprised, just confirmed. Harold had not left anything uncertain. I set the papers down and opened the velvet pouch next. Inside was a simple gold ring, one I recognized immediately. It had belonged to Harold's mother, passed down through the family, something he had once told me he would give to Linda someday. I held it in my palm for a moment, feeling the smooth curve of the metal, then set it gently back into the pouch. Some things were not meant to be rushed. Finally, I picked up the second envelope. My name was written the same way as before, but this time there was something different in the way the letters pressed into the paper, as if he had taken extra care. I opened it slowly and unfolded the note inside. The message was short, but it carried more weight than anything else in that box. He wrote about trust, about timing, about how people reveal themselves when circumstances change. He told me not to react too quickly, not to let emotion guide my decisions. And at the end, in the same steady handwriting, he had added one final line. You have more power than you think. Use it when the time is right. I read it once, then again, letting each word settle into place. There was no urgency in it, no fear, just quiet certainty. I folded the note carefully and placed it back in the envelope, then gathered the documents, stacking them neatly. When I slid the box closed and turned the keys back, the sound felt final in a way that was not ending, but beginning. I stepped out of the vault a few minutes later, the envelope and documents secured in my bag, my movements calm and measured. The teller glanced up as I passed, offering a polite smile, but she did not ask any questions. No one did. Outside, the sunlight had grown stronger, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I paused for a moment at the top of the steps, looking out at the street, at the town that had not changed, even though everything in my life had. Then I took a breath and stepped forward, no longer uncertain about where I was going next. I did not go back to the motel right away. Instead, I walked without a clear destination, letting the rhythm of my steps settle the thoughts that had begun to take shape in my mind. The envelope rested securely in my bag, along with the documents that had quietly changed everything. The town moved around me in its usual way, cars passing, people stepping in and out of shops, conversations blending into a low hum that felt distant, almost irrelevant. I passed a small diner on the corner, the kind Harold and I used to visit on Sunday mornings, and for a brief moment, I stopped. The memory came back clearly. He would always order the same thing. Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, toast with butter on the side. He used to say that routine made life easier, that when the important things were steady, everything else could fall into place. I stood there for a few seconds, then continued walking. Some routines were no longer mine to keep. As I moved further down the street, my thoughts began to shift from memory to something more deliberate. I replayed the past few weeks in my mind, not as a grieving widow this time, but as someone observing details that had once seemed unimportant. The way Linda had started handling the mail without asking. The way she had insisted on reviewing household bills. The subtle changes in tone when she spoke about expenses, about space, about what made sense moving forward. At the time, I had told myself she was trying to help, that she was stepping up. Now, each of those moments felt different. Calculated. Measured. I slowed my pace as the realization settled deeper. This had not been sudden. It had been building. Quietly. Carefully. I reached a small park and sat down on a wooden bench facing a row of bare trees. The branches swayed slightly in the breeze, their shadows stretching across the grass in long, thin lines. I rested my hands in my lap, feeling the calm settle in again. There was no anger rising in me. No desire to confront, to accuse, or to demand explanations. Those things belonged to a different version of me. The one who still believed that understanding would change outcomes. The one who believed that love, once given, guaranteed something in return. I understood now that it did not. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope again, opening it just enough to glance at Harold's words one more time. You have more power than you think. He had not written that for comfort. He had written it as instruction. I closed the envelope and placed it back carefully. Power did not need to be loud. It did not need to announce itself. It waited. It observed. It acted when the moment was right. I sat there for a while longer, letting the pieces come together. Linda believed I had nothing, that I was dependent, that without Harold, I would not know what to do, where to go, how to manage. She believed she had control because she had taken the visible parts of my life, the house, the routine, the role I had always played, but she had overlooked something fundamental. She had assumed that what she could see was everything that existed. I stood up slowly, the decision forming not as a sudden impulse, but as a quiet certainty. I would not rush. I would not react in a way that gave her what she expected. No arguments. No pleading. No attempts to explain or defend. Those would only confirm the version of me she had already decided on. Instead, I would do exactly what Harold had suggested. I would wait. I would watch. And when the time came, I would act. As I walked back toward the main street, I passed a real estate office with listings displayed in the window. Large homes. Smaller ones. Apartments. Numbers and descriptions neatly printed beneath each photo. I paused briefly, not out of uncertainty, but curiosity. It was strange to look at these options and realize that I was not limited by them. That my next step was not dictated by necessity, but by choice. That realization settled into me with a quiet kind of strength. I continued walking, eventually making my way back toward the motel. The neon sign buzzed faintly in the daylight, less noticeable now, almost ordinary. Inside, nothing had changed. The same clerk at the desk, the same quiet hallway, the same room waiting exactly as I had left it. I closed the door behind me and set my bag on the dresser, taking out the documents once more and laying them out carefully. I read through them again, slower this time, not searching for meaning, but confirming it. Every detail aligned, every signature clear. There was no ambiguity. The foundation of my life had not been taken from me. It had simply been hidden, waiting for me to recognize it. I folded the papers neatly and placed them back into my bag, then sat down on the edge of the bed. The room felt different now, not because anything had changed physically, but because I had. The uncertainty that had followed me out of that house was gone. In its place was something quieter, steadier, and far more dangerous than panic or grief. Clarity. I leaned back slightly, my hands resting calmly in my lap, and allowed myself a single, measured breath. Linda believed she had already won. She believed the situation was settled, that I would either comply or disappear into whatever life she had decided was appropriate for me. She did not know about the bank. She did not know about the documents. She did not know about the plan Harold had set in motion long before any of this happened. And for now, that was exactly how it needed to be. I turned off the lamp and sat in the dim light, the quiet hum of the air conditioner filling the space once again. There was no rush, no urgency, just time. And for the first time since everything began, I understood exactly how valuable that was. I did not rush into the next step, but I did not delay either. The following morning, I woke before the sun had fully risen, the motel room still dim and quiet. For a moment, I remained still, listening to the steady hum of the air conditioner, letting my thoughts settle into the shape they had begun to take the day before. There was no confusion left in me, no hesitation, just a clear understanding of what needed to happen next. I sat up slowly and reached for my bag, taking out the documents once more. I did not read them this time. I did not need to. I simply held them for a moment, feeling the weight of what they represented. Ownership, authority, control. Words I had never associated with myself before, not in any deliberate way. Harold had always handled these things, not because I could not, but because I never had to. Now, that responsibility rested with me, and I accepted it without resistance. I dressed carefully, choosing simple, practical clothes, and gathered everything I needed before leaving the room. The morning air was colder than the day before, but it felt sharper, more alive. I walked back toward the bank, my pace steady, my mind focused not on what had happened, but on what I was about to set in motion. Inside, the atmosphere was the same as before, calm and routine, but this time I approached the front desk with a different purpose. The same teller looked up, recognition, flickering briefly in her eyes before she smiled. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," she said. "How can I assist you today?" I returned the smile, composed and measured. "I would like to speak with a financial advisor," I said. She nodded immediately, as if she had expected that answer, and asked me to take a seat while she made a call. I sat down in one of the chairs near the window, watching the quiet movement of people around me. No one paid me any particular attention. No one saw anything unusual, and that was exactly how I wanted it. A few minutes later, a man in a tailored suit approached, introducing himself as Daniel Brooks. His handshake was firm but not overpowering, his expression professional but attentive. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, gesturing toward his office. "Please, come in." His office was simple, organized, with a desk that held only a few neatly arranged items. He invited me to sit, then waited without speaking, giving me the space to begin. I appreciated that. I reached into my bag and placed the documents on his desk, sliding them toward him without explanation. He glanced down, then began to review them carefully, his expression shifting slightly as he moved from one page to the next. It was subtle, but I noticed it. Recognition, understanding, perhaps even a degree of respect. When he looked back up at me, his tone had changed just enough to reflect what he had seen. "How would you like to proceed?" he asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight. It was not asking what I needed. It was asking what I intended. I folded my hands in my lap, my posture relaxed but steady. "I want everything reviewed," I said. "Accounts, properties, any active authorizations. I want to know exactly what is in my name and who currently has access." He nodded once, already reaching for a pen. "Of course. We can begin that immediately." There was no hesitation, no doubt, just action. As he worked, explaining certain details, outlining the structure of the accounts, I listened carefully, absorbing each piece of information without interruption. Some of it confirmed what I had already understood. Some of it revealed more than I expected. Access permissions that had been quietly extended. Secondary authorizations that had been added under the assumption of convenience. I did not react outwardly. I simply took note. When he finished, he looked at me again, waiting. I held his gaze calmly. "I want all secondary access removed," I said. Effective immediately. He did not question me. He did not ask for justification. He simply nodded and began the process. As he worked, I felt a quiet shift settle deeper within me. Not satisfaction. Not relief. Something more controlled than that. Alignment. The pieces were moving into place exactly as they should. When the paperwork was complete, he slid it toward me for review. I read through it carefully, line by line, not rushing, not assuming. Then I signed where necessary, my hand steady, my movements precise. When I handed the documents back, the change was already in motion. What had been accessible was no longer. What had been assumed was now defined. I stood up, gathering my things, and Daniel rose as well. "If you need anything further," he said, "please do not hesitate to contact me directly." I inclined my head slightly. "Thank you," I replied. And I meant it. Outside, the air felt different again, not because anything around me had changed, but because something fundamental had shifted within my reach. I walked slowly down the steps, pausing just long enough to look out at the street ahead. Linda would not notice anything yet. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. The systems she believed she controlled would begin to respond differently. Access denied. Information unavailable. Questions with no easy answers. And when that happened, she would have to face something she had not prepared for. The possibility that she had miscalculated. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder and continued walking, my pace unhurried, my expression calm. This was not confrontation. Not yet. This was preparation. And I intended to do it properly. I did not contact Linda. Not that day, not the next. I let the silence stretch, not as avoidance, but as space. Space for things to unfold without interference. Space for her to continue believing exactly what she believed. That I had gone quietly. That I was struggling somewhere, trying to piece together a life she had already decided I could not maintain. That belief was useful. I returned to the motel that afternoon and sat by the small window, watching the parking lot as the hours passed. People came and went, each carrying their own concerns, their own plans, their own assumptions about how their lives would continue. I found it strange how steady the world remained, even when something fundamental had shifted beneath your feet. I rested my hands on the table in front of me, the envelope no longer needing to be opened, the documents no longer needing to be reviewed. Everything was already in motion. It was just a matter of time before the effects began to surface. It happened sooner than I expected. Late that evening, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. I looked at it for a moment before picking it up, already knowing who it would be. Linda's name appeared on the screen, the letters sharp and familiar. I let it ring once more before answering. "Hello." My voice was calm, steady, unchanged. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to feel intentional. "Mom." Her tone was different. Not softer, not warmer, but uncertain. I had not heard that in her voice in a long time. "Yes," I replied. Another pause. I could almost hear her recalibrating, adjusting to something she did not fully understand yet. "Where are you?" she asked. A simple question, but not the one she wanted to ask. I glanced out the window, watching a car pull into the parking lot. "I am somewhere safe," I said. The words were true, and that was enough. She exhaled slowly, a faint sound of frustration slipping through. "That is not what I meant. I need to know where you are. Need. Not want. Not hope. Need." I let that word settle between us for a moment before responding. "Why?" Silence followed. Not the quiet kind, but the kind filled with unspoken calculations. "There are things that need to be handled," she said finally. "Bills. Accounts. I tried to access some of them today, and—" She stopped herself, but the unfinished sentence said more than the words would have. I leaned back slightly in my chair, my expression unchanged. "And?" I prompted gently. "I could not get in," she said, the control in her voice slipping just enough to reveal what lay underneath. "The access was denied. I thought maybe there was a mistake." I did not respond immediately. I let the silence stretch just a little longer this time, giving her space to feel it, to recognize it. "There was no mistake," I said finally. Another pause, sharper now. "What do you mean?" she asked. I could hear it clearly now. The shift. The first crack in the certainty she had been holding on to. "I mean exactly what I said," I replied. My tone did not change. It did not need to. The access was removed. The words settled heavily on the line between us. I imagined her standing in the kitchen, the same place where she had spoken to me just days ago with such quiet authority, now faced with something she had not anticipated. "You removed it?" she asked, as if the idea itself required confirmation. "Yes," I said. There was movement on her end, the faint sound of something being set down, perhaps a phone, perhaps a piece of paper. "Mom, you cannot just do that without talking to me," she said, her voice tightening. "There are responsibilities. Things that need to be managed." I closed my eyes briefly, not in frustration, but in recognition. The language had changed. Not, "you should," not, "you need to," but "you cannot." Control reframing itself as necessity. "They are being managed," I said calmly. "By me." The silence that followed was different this time. Not uncertain, not calculating, just still. "I thought," she began, then stopped. I waited, but she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. I knew what she had thought. That I would not understand. That I would not act. That I would accept whatever was decided for me, because I always had before. "Things are not the same anymore, Linda," I said quietly. Not as a warning. Not as a threat. Just as a statement. She did not respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost something. Not strength. Not confidence. Something else. Certainty. "We need to talk about this," she said. I nodded slightly, though she could not see me. "Yes," I replied. "We will." I ended the call before she could say anything else, placing the phone back on the table with the same steady movement I had used all day. The room felt quiet again, but not empty. Outside, the parking lot lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. I sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me once more. The first shift had happened. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to change the balance. And that was all it needed to be. I did not wait for Linda to call again. The next morning, I called her. Not out of urgency, not out of obligation, but because timing matters when you are the one setting it. The phone rang twice before she answered, quicker than before, as if she had been expecting it. "Mom," she said, her voice alert now, controlled, but edged with something she could not quite hide. "We need to meet," I said. No greeting, no softening, just the statement. There was a brief pause, then a shift in her tone, something closer to what I used to recognize. "Yes," she replied. "We do. Where are you?" I looked out the motel window, watching the morning light settle over the empty parking lot. "At the house," I said calmly. "Today? At noon." The silence that followed was immediate and sharp. I could almost feel her processing it, recalculating the situation in real time. "You are coming back?" she asked. Not welcoming, not relieved, just surprised. "Yes," I said. Another pause, shorter this time. "All right," she replied. "We will be here." We. That word did not go unnoticed. I ended the call without adding anything further and set the phone down. For a moment, I remained still, letting the decision settle fully into place. This was not about returning. It was about stepping into a space that had always been mine, but that I had allowed others to redefine. I dressed with the same care as the days before, choosing simplicity over anything that might suggest uncertainty. There was no need to prove anything through appearance. Clarity does not require decoration. I gathered my things, making sure the documents were secure in my bag, the envelope resting where it had been since the night I found it. Then I left the room without looking back. The drive back to the house took less than 15 minutes, but it felt longer, not because of distance, but because of memory. Every turn in the road carried something familiar. The grocery store Harold used to insist on visiting every Saturday. The gas station where he would always check the tire pressure, even when it was not necessary. Small routines that once felt permanent, now existing only as echoes. When the house came into view, I did not slow down. I pulled into the driveway with the same steady motion I had used countless times before, turning off the engine and sitting for just a moment, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The porch looked the same. The windows, the front door. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I stepped out of the car and walked up the path, the sound of my footsteps against the concrete quiet but deliberate. When I reached the door, I did not knock. I opened it and walked inside. Linda was standing in the living room, exactly where I expected her to be. Her posture was straight, her arms crossed lightly in front of her, her expression composed but tight around the edges. Behind her stood Mark, her husband, his presence more reserved, his gaze moving between us without settling. Neither of them spoke immediately. I closed the door behind me and set my bag down on the small table near the entrance, the movement calm, unhurried. The house felt different. Not unfamiliar, but altered, as if it had been holding its breath. "You came back," Linda said finally. I looked at her, meeting her eyes without tension. "I did," I replied. The silence stretched for a moment. Then she took a small step forward. "We need to understand what is going on," she said. "You cannot just remove access like that. There are responsibilities here." The words were familiar. The tone was not. I walked past her slowly, moving into the living room, my gaze taking in the details. The furniture arranged slightly differently. The absence of certain items. Subtle changes that spoke more clearly than any explanation. I turned to face her again, my expression unchanged. "You are right," I said. "There are responsibilities." She nodded quickly, as if seizing on the agreement. "Exactly. And we have been handling things, making sure everything stays on track." I let the words settle before responding. "No," I said quietly. "You have been assuming control." The difference was small, but it landed between us with clarity. Her expression shifted, just slightly. "That is not fair," she replied, her voice tightening. "We were helping. You were not in a position to manage everything after." She stopped, leaving the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. After Harold. After the loss. After what she believed had weakened me. I inclined my head slightly, acknowledging the thought without accepting it. "I understand what you believed," I said. "But belief does not change reality." Mark shifted behind her, his posture adjusting as if he was beginning to understand that this conversation was not unfolding the way they had expected. Linda's arms dropped slightly to her sides, her control slipping just enough to reveal the tension beneath. "Then explain it to me," she said. "Explain why I cannot access the accounts anymore." I held her gaze steadily. "Because they are not yours to access," I said. The room seemed to still around us, the weight of that sentence settling into the space. She opened her mouth to respond, then paused, as if the words she had prepared no longer fit. "We need to sit down," she said finally, her voice quieter now, more measured. I nodded once. "Yes," I replied. "We do." But I did not move immediately. I remained standing, exactly where I was, letting the moment hold, letting the shift fully register. This was no longer a conversation about control. It was a conversation about ownership. And for the first time since everything began, that distinction was clear to everyone in the room. We did not sit at the dining table. That was the first thing I noticed as Linda gestured toward the living room instead, as if unconsciously avoiding the place where everything had begun to unravel. I followed her without comment and took a seat in the armchair near the window, the same one Harold used to prefer in the evenings. The fabric still held the faint imprint of use, a quiet reminder of a presence that had not truly left, only shifted into something less visible. Linda remained standing for a moment before sitting across from me, her posture controlled, her hands clasped together tightly in her lap. Mark stayed slightly behind her, leaning against the wall, his arms folded, observing more than participating. No one spoke immediately. The silence was not empty. It was full of things that had not yet been said, of assumptions being quietly dismantled. I placed my bag on the small table beside me and opened it slowly, not as a dramatic gesture, but as a natural one. From inside, I took out the documents and set them down carefully in front of me, aligning the edges with deliberate precision. Linda's eyes moved to them instantly, drawn by something she could not yet define. "What is that?" she asked. Her voice was steadier now, but there was a trace of tension beneath it. I did not answer right away. Instead, I picked up the first document and slid it across the table toward her. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before reaching out and taking it, her eyes scanning the page quickly at first, then slowing as the meaning began to register. I watched her expression change, not abruptly, but gradually. The certainty she had been holding onto began to shift, replaced by something more uncertain, more fragile. "This," she started, then stopped, her eyes moving back over the lines as if looking for something she had missed. "This cannot be right." I folded my hands calmly in my lap. "It is," I said. She shook her head slightly, her gaze lifting to meet mine. "The house, it says," her voice trailed off again, the words refusing to form as clearly as they had in her mind before. "It says the house is in my name." I finished for her. The room seemed to tighten around that statement, the air settling heavier between us. Mark shifted slightly against the wall, his posture no longer as relaxed as it had been when I walked in. Linda looked back down at the document, then reached for another one, flipping through the pages with more urgency now. Account statements, ownership records, legal confirmations that left no room for interpretation. Each page reinforced the same reality. Not shared, not transferred, not pending. Mine. "But Dad," she began, her voice softer now, less certain. "Dad always handled these things." I inclined my head slightly. "He did," I said, "but he did not change them." The distinction hung in the air, quiet but undeniable. She looked up at me again, searching for something in my expression, perhaps an explanation that would align with what she had believed. She did not find it. "Why did you not tell me?" she asked. It was not an accusation. Not quite. More a question born from the sudden absence of certainty. I considered the question for a moment before answering. "Because you did not ask," I said. The simplicity of it seemed to unsettle her more than anything else. She leaned back slightly, the document still in her hands, her fingers gripping the edges more tightly than before. We're trying to help," she said, repeating the phrase. But this time it sounded less like a statement and more like something she was trying to convince herself of. I nodded once, acknowledging the intent without confirming it. "I understand that," I said. "But help does not mean taking control of what is not yours." Mark finally spoke, his voice measured but cautious. "No one was trying to take anything," he said. "We were just making sure things were managed properly." I turned my gaze to him briefly, then back to Linda. "Management implies authority," I said. "And authority comes from ownership." The distinction settled again, clearer this time, leaving less room for interpretation. Linda looked down at the documents once more, then slowly placed them back on the table, her movements more careful now, more deliberate. The tension in her posture had changed. It was no longer about holding control. It was about understanding its absence. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. I did not answer immediately. I let the question sit between us, giving it the space it deserved. Then I reached into my bag once more and took out the envelope Harold had left for me. I did not open it. I simply placed it beside the documents, my fingers resting lightly on top of it. "Now," I said, my voice calm, steady, unchanged, "we start dealing with things as they actually are." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They carried enough weight on their own. Linda did not respond right away. She looked at the envelope, then back at me, her expression no longer defined by certainty or control, but by something quieter. Recognition. Not of defeat, not yet, but of a reality she had not anticipated. And for the first time since I walked back into that house, the balance between us was no longer assumed. It was defined. No one moved for a long moment after I spoke. The documents rested on the table between us, no longer just paper, but something heavier, something that had quietly shifted the ground beneath everything Linda thought she understood. She sat there, her hands now resting still in her lap, her posture no longer rigid, but not relaxed either. Mark had straightened from the wall, his attention fully present now, no longer observing from a distance, but part of something he had not expected to be drawn into. I did not rush to fill the silence. There was nothing left to explain. Everything that needed to be understood was already there, laid out clearly, without emotion, without interpretation. Linda was the first to speak, her voice lower than before, more measured. "So what are you going to do?" she asked. Not demanding, not assuming, asking. I looked at her steadily, taking in the change in her tone, the absence of certainty that had once defined her words. "I am going to continue managing what belongs to me," I said. The answer was simple, but it carried everything it needed to. She nodded slowly, as if accepting the statement, even if she did not fully understand its implications yet. "And us," she added after a moment, the word quieter, more uncertain than anything she had said before. I let that question settle. It was different from the others. Not about control, not about access. Something else. Something she had not considered until now. I leaned back slightly in the chair, my hands resting calmly, my expression unchanged. "That depends," I said. Her eyes lifted to meet mine, searching again, but this time not for a way to regain control. For direction. "On what?" she asked. I held her gaze, steady and clear. "On whether you understand the difference between helping and deciding," I said. The words were not sharp, but they were precise. She did not respond immediately. Her eyes moved briefly to the documents on the table, then back to me. "I thought," she began, then stopped, her voice catching slightly on the edge of something she could not quite say. I did not finish the sentence for her. Some realizations need to be reached, not given. Mark shifted slightly, his voice quieter now, less certain than before. "We thought we were doing what was necessary," he said. I nodded once, acknowledging the statement without agreeing to it. "And now you know," I replied. The room fell quiet again, but it was not the same silence as before. This one was different. Less tense. More defined. Linda exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just slightly, as if releasing something she had been holding on to without realizing it. "I did not think you would," she paused, searching for the right words, "handle it like this." I allowed a small, almost imperceptible shift in my expression. Not a smile. Not quite. "Neither did you," I said. The truth of it settled between us, not as accusation, but as recognition. She nodded once, more firmly this time, as if accepting something she could no longer deny. "No," she admitted quietly. I reached forward then, gathering the documents from the table, stacking them neatly, returning them to my bag with the same careful precision I had used before. The movement was simple, but it marked something. The end of one phase. The beginning of another. When I stood, both Linda and Mark did the same, almost instinctively. The shift in dynamic was subtle, but clear. No one tried to stop me. No one questioned what I would do next. Linda watched me for a moment, then spoke again, her voice steady, but no longer controlled in the same way. "Are you staying?" she asked. I paused, considering the question, not because I did not know the answer, but because it deserved to be given clearly. "No," I said. The word was calm, final, without hesitation. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but enough to show that this was not the answer she had expected. "I see," she said softly. I picked up my bag and moved toward the door, my steps unhurried, my posture unchanged. When I reached the entrance, I paused briefly, my hand resting on the handle, the same place where everything had shifted days before. I turned slightly, looking back at the room, at Linda, at the life that had once felt fixed and certain. "This house will remain exactly as it is," I said. "But how we exist in it moving forward will not." The words were not a warning, not a condition, just a statement of fact. Linda nodded slowly, her gaze steady now, no longer searching, no longer uncertain, but processing something new. "I understand," she said. I opened the door and stepped outside, the afternoon light settling around me in a way that felt familiar, but not binding. The air was still, the street quiet, the world continuing exactly as it always had. But I did not carry the same weight into it. I walked down the path without looking back this time, my steps steady, my direction clear. I had not raised my voice. I had not argued. I had not demanded anything. And yet, everything had changed. Not because I forced it to, because I finally understood where I stood. And once that was clear, everything else followed.